Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me on the Wine Access Experience on Facebook. My name is Vanessa Conlin, Head of Wine for Wine Access. Very excited to be back. This is actually the first repeat guest that we've had, so I'm very excited to have a conversation. I know pressure is definitely on. So Tor Kenward is here tonight.
Why would you do this to yourself?
I'm actually not asking myself that question because you were such a wealth of knowledge and stories, and just I can't wait to keep the conversation going. You know, I thought last time that we could have just kept talking, and there were so many things I wanted to ask about, but you know, the roast was in the oven, and I had to go tend to that. So anyway, we're back. Anyone watching at home, please, if you have any questions, we'd love this to be interactive. You can type in your question. I will answer, or I will pose as many of them as I can for Tor to answer, for us to discuss. So don't be shy. And again, anyone joining us just now, thank you for joining. I'm Vanessa Conlin. This is Tor Kenward, who kind of needs no introduction, but long and storied history in the Napa Valley, and we're gonna, I think rather than me telling Tor, rather than me telling you about what you've done, I think we should just have a conversation about it. But I think first, I would love to pour a glass of wine.
Okay, so let's do that.
I have your 2017 proprietary red, which I read up on is Bordeaux blend Petit Verdot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Cabernet Franc. And I am curious. First of all, thank you. I'm very excited to try this. I think this is a new release. Is that?
Yes. Okay. Yes. You've not had it up to this point. This is your first sip. Ah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. This, after 40 years of being a vintner here, this is one of those wines that creates that excitement that gets you up in the morning and still very, very engaged, very involved with what you're doing as a winemaker, because it's one of those wines that came to us as a complete surprise. We did not expect that wine to be what it is. The origin of that wine was 2016. We were working with fabulous grapes from Vine Hill Ranch, which I think a good number of your people out there know, Bruce and Vine Hill Ranch. Extraordinary property, home of the Vicina Bond Project. Used to, a lot of people don't know, but it was also an origin point for some of those great Beaulieu private reserves, came from Vine Hill Ranch, or one of the blocks anyway. And we, through Barbarajo actually, I was introduced to the Petit Verdot from Vine Hill Ranch, and I begged Bruce for some of that, and I had some Petit Verdot, and we had a block of Cabernet, and they came in together, which you don't always know is going to happen, but they did. And they're sitting there at the winery, and my winemaker comes up and says, I want to co-ferment them. And I'm going, no, I don't want to do that, Jeff. I want to see what each of these is going to be by itself, so I can sort of get an idea, because there's a new block of cab that we're working with. It was an old block, but it was a new block for us. And I said, no, I want to taste the cab just to see what it's like. I know the Petit Verdot because we'd worked with it before. And Jeff goes, I really want to co-ferment them too. And I'm going, that would be 40% Petit Verdot in a Cabernet. Jeff, what are you thinking about? Looney Tunes here. And Jeff started to have a few other winemakers he knew ping me, call me, tap me, and tell me that I should do this thing. And, since we have such a large board of directors for these major corporate decisions, I was able to bypass them very quickly. And I guess in a very weak moment, granted Jeff his wish. So he co-fermented the two together, again, this absurd amount of Petit Verdot. in a Cabernet, and it turned out to be I think one of the best wines we've ever made. It took all those harder tannins in Petit Verdot and turned them into sort of buttery, soft tannins through the co-fermentation. Just a complete surprise, and it made this, for lack of a better term, a very sexy wine to me, and it was something that I wasn't familiar with in Bordeaux or California, and I really liked the profile because there's a mineral quality to it that you get from, Cab Franc and Petit Verdot, but it still had that lushness and great mid palate. So this is an accident, or actually my winemaker would not say it's an accident. It was well contrived by Jeff, turned into an area that we're spending a lot of focus on right now, which is this co-fermentation with Petit Verdot and Cab Franc. And in the last several years, since 2016, it's created some of the more exciting wines, for me anyway, personally, that we're working with right now. So you're tasting one of those sort of evolutionary wines from that 2016 winemaker decision.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. It's extraordinary.
What do you think about the tannins in that? Now, that's, again, a really, really high percentage of Petit Verdot. I couldn't talk about it for some reasons you probably understand, but the Cabernet Franc in that wine is from Beckstoffer Toplan. So I hope Andy's not listening out there.
No, this is just a conversation between the two of us. Don't worry about it. Stays here. Okay. But I think the tannin profile actually reminds me a lot of, it has that, a word comes to mind that I used to describe Bordeaux tannins, which is that they're very fine-grained and pixelated. So they can be kind of dense, but they have this, like, you know what I mean by pixelated? They're dense, but they're not hard. You still get this sort of like silty, beautiful texture on the palate while still having that structure. So I think it's extraordinary.
I've never used that word pixelated, but I like that. You're kind of pixelated right now.
It's, Wi-Fi these days. What can I say? So you actually led into a question I wanted to ask you, which was sort of about winemaking techniques or, winemaking trends. So you talked about co-fermentation. Is there anything in terms of winemaking that you haven't tried yet that you would really like to explore?
Wow. That's a question I don't think I've ever been really asked. I would always like to try new coopers, just to see if there's, a little spice that we haven't seen before. So both Jeff and I try to keep our ear to the winemaker's telegraph, if you will, on maybe some new small coopers that are out there, and we usually try to pick one or two of those every year to take a look at, try a barrel or two. So there's always, how can we not radically change, but how can we fine tune the coopers that we use and the barrels that we use. We've tried so many things. We've barrel fermented red wines. We've used Darnajou Puncheons for different red projects. We've done the amphoras. We've done, most of the rabbit holes that are offered for high-end winemaking, we've tried. The ones that we haven't tried, we've certainly, as you know, and this is one of the wonderful things that we have that's very different than most industries, is that most winemakers will open up their winery and share their barrels and their thinking with you. So we often go to other wineries, or have over the years, and sat down with people that we respect and are doing some pretty exciting things too, and say, okay, what are you doing? What's working? Let's taste through some of these things. So both Jeff and I have been very fortunate to go and taste through other kind of experimentations that are going on out there. A lot of people are talking about different fermentation vessels right now, which could be, some of those concrete fermentation tanks. You see them sometimes in Bordeaux. I was at, Cheval Blanc, and they had a whole array of some of the new custom tanks that they were using that were cement. I know some winemakers here. They can become, I mean, you can get so down a rabbit hole in winemaking, as you well know, that it comes down to actually where did that cement come from? So Italian cement it's true.
Yes.
And winemakers brag about where the cement came from. So, you know, and the amphoras. Where did the material for the amphora come from? Did it come from some volcano in Italy? You know, you can. I'll go to my grave, and there'll be tons of things I wish I had still had time to do. It's just it's that much fun and that crazy.
Yeah. So speaking of, just the wine, not just winemaking, but the wine business, the wine industry, are there certain things that you would say that, we do, really well in terms of forward thinking or being cutting edge? And are there things about the wine business that kind of you think, gosh, that's really backwards and old fashioned?
That you can go at that question from about 100 different angles. Let's take Chardonnay, which is an interesting way of sort of approaching that question. When I got into the wine business in the 70s, they were making Chardonnay, most of the Chardonnay, most all the high-end Chardonnay, Robert Mondavi, Jordan, there were less than 50 wineries around Napa Valley. But the high-end people were fermenting in stainless steel and then putting in brand new French oak barrels. There were a couple small wineries like Hansel over in Sonoma. I'm trying to think of the name of the old winery down in the Santa Cruz Mountains that was doing Martin Ray, and a few others that were doing barrel fermentation, real Burgundian winemaking. I used to go to Burgundy in the 70s and 80s and sit down with Noblet at Romani Conti and some of the other winemakers, and they all fermented in barrel and racked and put back in barrel, aged in barrel, went through malo, and that's the way they made their wines. So I came back from one of those trips and asked Behringer they would like to start a program in that direction. The timing was great because Dr. Singleton at UC Davis just did a big paper on, or was just about to publish a paper on the advantages of barrel fermentation, the integration of oak being better if you go through that method. So if you look at that, we went backwards instead of forwards in the technology was stainless steel, which we stepped away from, and we went back to the technology that was, hundreds of years, if not 1,000 years old. Mm-hmm. So we did that with Chardonnay. We did it again with Chardonnay when some of us reject the new Dijon clones and some of the new clonal material. We're going back to the old shock cluster, Wente selection clones. So we go backwards sometimes and look at what's been successful in the past as really maybe the best pathway right now for us to go. Mm-hmm. So, old technology sometimes rears its head and tells you that that's the best way to go, not anything fancy new. You can go another direction and look at optical sorters. Optical sorters, I think, which is newer technology, has dramatically changed the quality level of wine, not only in Napa Valley, but Bordeaux, and other places that have incorporated that into winemaking. So, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, when I was in Bordeaux not that long ago, I saw some of the good wineries, very respected wineries, using the old tanks, stainless steel tanks for fermentation. We all basically use stainless steel, though some of us ferment in oak, large oak, rarely small oak. But what was interesting is that they were pumping out into sluices like we used to do in the 80s and 90s. So it was old technology, where I think the best wineries that I saw in Bordeaux were using some new technology like the concrete tanks, or tanks where you can actually ferment inside the tank without having to run it all the way out into a sluice and then pump it back into a tank. So I think some of these new tanks are far superior to some of those older tanks that I saw at some very famous wineries. Yet you see some wineries using new technology. It's fascinating. Again, you can choose 100 different rabbit holes to crawl into here. But I think that's one of the reasons why I love this business. It allows you to be challenged every single day that you're engaged in this business. And if you're not engaged in trying to figure out what's making the best wine, then you probably should have considered making widgets or something, because this is not a good attitude.
No, no. Well, so speaking of kind of, experimentation or winemaking techniques, I think last time we sat down virtually and talked, you started to tell us about, I think you had like your own sort of winemaking experimentation program at Beringer, if I'm correct.
Yeah, Beringer was extremely, I don't know what the right word, generous, kind. They allowed me to do a lot of things that I'm not sure larger wineries would allow somebody to do now. They allowed me to actually build a little small winery within the big winery, so I could experiment around. So every year for about 15 years, I would make a barrel or two of wine, bring writers on in, friends on in, and we'd go through the entire process from actually going out and picking the grapes, crushing the wine. I had some people stomp the wine occasionally, which was kind of fun, like Lucille Ball, and then take them through the aging process, the whole thing. When you do it on small scale, and the way that I'm making wine right now is small scale also, I mean, you get to know every barrel. You follow the wine throughout the process, and it allows you also to not manipulate a wine a lot, because you only have a small amount of it. You're not worried about things, and you don't have to put it in large tanks, and you don't have to do things that larger producers have to do just for their insurance policy. You can experiment around. You can do something stupid like do the Petit Verdot Cabernet thing that my winemaker talked me into. And, you get surprised now and then. You can stay really engaged with almost every aspect of winemaking. If you stay small and very focused, which is what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So speaking of those days, then, since you did have this little winery within the winery, was there anything that you remember that you made that like really surprised you in how delicious it was? And was there anything that you made where you thought, wow, this is really terrible?
Well, I mean, after all those years, yeah, I had one wine get away from me. And I forget what year that was, but it was some grapes I'd got off Howe Mountain. But it did get away from me. But most of the wines, I can only think of one that again escaped me. The wines have aged extremely well. I made several barrels for the year that my daughter was born, which is 1986. And we poured them at her wedding, and damn if it wasn't good. I mean, there was a story behind it, but I thought that wine just rocked that night. And it was maybe 30 years old at the time. So what I'm going to do, Vanessa, and I'm going to invite you, is I'm going to, once we get out of this madness that we're in, I'm going to set up all those homemade wines, and we're going to taste them one day.
Oh,
Just
wow.
go through every one of them.
Be honored.
Yeah. Well, you know Matt very well. Yeah,
Yes.
Matt really wanted to do this, and you know, we had to put it on hold for a couple reasons, but we're going to get around and do it, and you're invited.
I'm beyond honored. Thank you, and I will be there. I'll cancel everything. Joe, if you're watching my CEO, whatever you have planned for me that day is not happening.
I love
it. Tor, one of the things I actually love about chatting with you is sometimes I have these questions that I want to answer or that I want to ask you, and you sort of naturally answer them, or you lead me into like questions that I hadn't thought about asking. Because one of the things I was going to ask was, what you actually drank at your wedding, but that led me to a new question, which is about sort of the experience and enjoyment of tasting or drinking wine. So I'm curious what you think. How much is it about? How much is the experience or your mood or where you are, like on your vacation or your wedding, that impacts the enjoyment of the wine versus just actual quality in the glass?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's interesting. I don't know why, but it's something I've been thinking about recently a little bit more than I maybe have for a while. I'm trying to write down notes and tell some, as you know, and some people know, I've been doing a diary thing on the website. Try to get something in every week, and so I'm reflecting a little bit more. And for me, I would rate the environment that you're in when you're drinking that wine, and that is a huge part the people you're drinking it with, the occasion possibly being a part of that play, where your head's at. Yeah. Are you celebrating something? Are you just wanting to get together? I now put a huge percentage of the enjoyment of what wines I'm pulling out with the people that are around the table. So if we're doing 100-point scale, my scales are very different than most critics that would rate a wine. I would put the environment, the time, the place, where I am personally, where the people are around me personally, in there as a huge part of the enjoyment of my wine. Now, obviously, you and I could be sitting, and it sounds like something out of Sideways, in a hamburger joint, drinking, a 59 Mouton or something. And we probably would enjoy a glass or two of that wine, but after a glass or two, I want somebody else to be sharing that with me. I'd feel gypped if I had to drink it alone.
Yeah.
So,
agree.
It's people and company. I'm not a young man anymore, and I would have to say the last couple of years, the bottles that I've enjoyed the most have been with good company and stories to tell, and hopefully some really good food around the table. That kind of environment.
Well, you're certainly useful in your energy and your enthusiasm. So I don't think that's a true statement, Tor. So you mentioned your diary online, which is fantastic. And for anyone watching the Wine Access experience at home, I encourage you to go check it out. It's a wealth of not just information about Tor, but about just history, and it's really fascinating. But I'm curious, Tor, because it's out there, any people can go and read this. So is there anything that you thought about putting on there, and then at the last minute thought, well, that's too risky. I'm not going to publish that.
Every day. Yeah, I'm just finding myself more and more wanting to be a little outrageous, I think, or a little bit more of a bad boy. So I have to bounce it off my wife before it ever enters on there. I had a piece that was about my first trip to Europe as a winemaker, and being just overwhelmed with the hospitality, that European hospitality, and the first night in Champagne, ending up in a famous chateau in an onyx marble bathtub with a bottle of champagne sitting there for me as I entered my room, and then a multi-course dinner, and I was just overwhelmed. But I had one picture that I took of myself in the bathtub with a bottle of champagne, and my wife still thinks somebody else took that photograph, and I took it myself, and I can't convince her otherwise. But we ended up using that photograph in there, which was kind of fun. I got a little grief from some people, but anyway.
Well, you're still married.
I am. She hasn't forgotten. She still asks me, but
Yeah.
it's part of a successful marriage, I guess.
So, well, champagne is definitely part of a successful marriage.
Absolutely. Still love a good bottle of champagne.
Oh, yeah. My coworkers, they actively make fun of me, but it's because it's based in truth about how much I like champagne. So along the lines of sort of, risque topics, but I think it's out there. But I wanted to ask, did you know did you know that Julia Child was a spy?
Julia Child was what? As you know, Julia was a personal friend, and we did quite a few things together in the latter years of her life. She asked me to be her escort when she came up to the Napa Valley, so I'd pick her up and drive her around, and she'd wear me completely out. It'd be about 11 o'clock or midnight, and she'd be still cranky, and I'd start nodding off, but I got her home safely all those nights. She never ever talked about her spy days. I found out about it, I think afterwards, or maybe knew about it at the time, but it's one of those things we just never talked about. So she did not confide in me any spy stories. I wish I could tell you one, but it didn't happen.
I had to ask.
Yeah. No, it's good. A funny story with Julia. I don't think I've ever told this one. I was visiting her down in Santa Barbara. She had a retirement home down there. And we had a big brunch at her place. And she was always looking over my shoulder to make sure that I ate all the butter and everything that was, the bacon, the butter, and everything. It was eggs Benedict, so we had to have eggs Benedict. There was lots of bacon. I had to have lots of bacon. It was a big brunch. And we go back to her. She had a custom apartment. I think Viking did the kitchen for her, set it all up. And, we're talking away at a little foyer area that she had in this unit. And all of a sudden, she just sort of collapsed downward on the table. And I panicked almost.
Yeah.
Felt her pulse. She was still okay and breathing. Called the front desk. Got somebody there immediately. They put her down, rested her a little bit like that. They said she's fine. Don't worry about it. Blah blah blah. So 2 hours later, I had this phone call from Julia, and she goes, "Oh, Tor, I'm so sorry. They changed my meds." I'm so sorry. I'm so glad you're better now. And
Wow.
so even the famous Julia Child can have a very normal moment where she can drop her chicken and let it sit on the floor for a couple seconds and switch her meds.
Thank you for telling that story. You heard it here first. No, that's great. Thank you. So, I'm just thinking back to, what I said before, which is true, which is kind of, you have so much energy. It's you're seemingly like unstoppable in that. But I'm curious, like when you need to sort of like recharge, is there something that's not wine that really like brings you joy?
And that's an interesting point. I think every one of us, and I'm sure very much for you, you have to find ways of recharging or allowing your mind and your whole thought process and your focus. I think focus is the key word, to get off to something else for a little bit to recharge. I've gravitated to two sports. One is fly fishing. If I'm out fly fishing, which unfortunately takes travel in, so you can't do it, today or tomorrow you can't do it at all right now unless you do it in the backyard. But when I'm out fly fishing for a couple days, I don't think of anything else. It's the presentation of the fly, the scenery, who I'm with, and hopefully it's a guide that knows the area better than I do, and give me some insight to flies, what's happening and so on. But it opens up a world where you have to really focus to be good or to catch some fish. Golf is another one. You're always trying to find perfection in golf. If you're a good golfer, or strive to be a good golfer. And if you go about it with, I want to hit the perfect shot, every shot, of course we don't do that, but we like to think we can, is you go through a thought process, and again, you're with, usually with a couple people. There's only two things you can think about it. It's that, trying to hit that perfect shot and the people that you're around. And you can't think about anything else, or you have a horrible day. It's not a good golf day. So I can do a 3 to 4 hour round of golf and feel completely refreshed because I've taken my mind off everything else other than just what I was doing. So I really encourage anybody, and it doesn't have to be golf or fly fishing, to find some sort of, maybe it's a crossword puzzle, I don't know, something where you can just disappear and really enjoy what you're doing, and then come out of it refocused in what you're doing, which would be winemaking for me, or making wine. So I think that has helped me out, finding things that I can refocus on and completely lose myself in for a period of time.
Good advice. This is like, I'm not only learning about wine, this is like therapy.
Well, for you and I, we have spent hours going through books on wine, opening up, several bottles of wine, comparing them, trying to understand them. That by itself is a huge, wonderful rabbit hole for somebody that's a professional in another area, not in the wine business like you and I are in the wine business. That's actually how I got started, and maybe how you got started. You started to open up a few bottles of wine, try to find out about them, who made them, how did they make them, what grapes were there, where were they made, what's the history behind that whole thing. So I encourage anybody that's not a wine professional, go down it, because you'll never know everything you can about any one producer.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a few of us out there.
There's a few. Yeah. Not just Napa.
Not just Napa.
Yeah. Wow. So my last question, because I don't want to tie up the rest of your evening, but is there one wine myth that exists that if you could wave a magic wand, you could dispel in the minds of consumers?
Wow. I'm actually focusing on some of that right now.
Oh,
Oh, there's actually so many of them. One is the drinking window on wine. One of them is the drinking window on wine. I mean, how often do you get asked, when do I drink this wine, or when should I open this wine?
all the time.
All the time.
Yep.
So maybe we can just look at that one. There's quite a few, but that's one that we both get a lot. That is such a personal question.
Yep.
So I would go back to anybody that's asking me that, saying, okay, when do you like to drink your wines? Do you enjoy them young? Do you really prefer them with a lot of age, a little bit of age? You and I have met so many people that like wine in so many different ways. You know, I'll get myself in trouble as I normally do, but I've met some very good palates in England that absolutely adored dead wines. You know, to me, the wines are dead. You know, I look at them as almost necrophiliacs. You know, they have this, and I'm going, what are you finding in this thing? It's a curiosity, but it's not alive anymore. So you have that spectrum, and then I met one very well-known wine critic who does not like old wine at all. Mm-hmm. So he would drink nothing but young wine, and anything that had still a lot of wonderful curiosity and interest to it that may be 20, 30 years old, he would not like, and I love it. So it's finding your sweet spot.
Yeah.
Open wines, share wines with friends, remove corks, and don't ask me that question.
Yeah.
Find it out yourself.
No, I love your answer. It's actually the same, you know, very similar to the one that I give when asked that question, you know, because I remember, you know, being at the home of a consumer literally the day that their, you know, the newly released vintage of Screaming Eagle showed up by delivery, and they opened it that night, you know, and you know what? They loved it. So
bingo.
Why not? You know, and then conversely, you know, I had one of my former bosses here in Napa, you know, he had an amazing collection. He never opened a bottle that to him wasn't too young. I mean, the oldest bottle in the cellar it ended up, it was too young. So I'm so with you there.
There's no right or wrong. It is really so personal.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Tor, it's such a pleasure. I really could tie up many more hours of your time, and we'll probably ask you to come back if you'd be willing, because it's educational, it's entertaining, it's fun. I feel like I got great life advice. I mean, I don't know what else I could ask for, honestly. So.
Well, I'll always take an invitation that you throw at me.
Thank you.
So if you throw the invitation out there, I will probably always say yes. Well,
and I'm not going to forget your invitation. I'm going to hold you to that.
That's going to happen. That's going to happen.
Okay.
And it's going to be fun. You and I will both, as you know, that's the great thing. We're still learning. We'll both learn something from that, which is going to be fun. I'm going to look forward to that.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait. Thank you. And thanks everyone who watched us from home. I hope you enjoyed this time as much as I did, because I had a blast. So thanks for joining us on the Wine Access Experience. Thank you, Tor, so much for your time and your energy. And have a great evening, and I'll hope to see you soon.
Cheers. Thank you, Vanessa.
Bye.